What's up, amigos? It's the Prodigy Maker Minute with yours truly, Chris Lewitt. As you may know, I'm the former #1 for Cornell University, pro circuit player, elite junior development coach, and author and educator, author of The Secrets of Spanish Tennis and the Tennis Technique Bible. On this Prodigy Maker Minute, I wanted to continue to talk a little bit about Bjorn Borg and his influence on Spanish tennis, and how back in the day, in the 1970s, Bjorn, Bjorn Borg was becoming a star, and he became a great role model for coaches in Spain, especially the great one, Luis Bruguera. And Luis Bruguera was one of the founding fathers of, I'll call it modern Spanish tennis, the Spanish Armada, the Spanish Revolution, so to speak, in tennis, where Spain went from a small, relatively successful country to a giant superpower of world tennis. So Bjorn Borg was the model for Luis Bruguera and most likely for many other coaches of that era, including Pato Alvarez. I don't have Pato Alvarez on the record saying that, but I would assume that Pato Alvarez very much liked the game of Bjorn Borg, because Pato Alvarez liked players who were patient and who grinded a lot, and who basically were very defensive at times. Pato Alvarez loved to teach that style. So imagine back in the day in the 70s, I don't know who you liked, if you were around back then, if you're watching this and you're older, but back in that era, there were players like Bjorn Borg, and then there were players like John McEnroe, who were very aggressive serve and volley type players. And you sort of had to, come down on one side or the other, how you were going to teach tennis to your students. So imagine back in that era, I just think interesting thought experiment is, did you favor the game of McEnroe back then? Or did you favor the game of someone like Bjorn Borg? So from the Spanish perspective, I would say they really don't like the game of John McEnroe. They would say that game, if you ask most Spaniards, I would think they would say, and I've spoken to enough Spanish coaches that I think I can speak for them, they would say that his game is very impulsive, very irresponsible, very hyper-aggressive, too forward, like too much going to the net without building the point, and not balanced enough in general. I think that they would say that here's a great athlete, great player, obviously, who plays. I think Luis Bruguera would probably say he plays completely wrong, like an idiot. Now, I'm not saying that, but I think most Spanish players, when they see someone who plays an aggressive serve and volley game, they just scratch their heads and think, like, this is idiotic. This is crazy. I'm not saying that. I grew up. I used to love Stefan Edberg and Pete Sampras, and I like John McEnroe's game. I loved that when I was a kid. But from a Spanish point of view, in that era, I think they would say this is nuts. The way, like, this guy is so talented and he's just rushing to the net haphazardly, taking on so much risk and still playing quite well. I think most Spanish coaches would see the game that way, the styles that way, and they would favor the style of Borg. But essentially, I think you could make a good case that the Spanish point of view, the Spanish worldview when it comes to those styles was correct. And they, Borg was the harbinger. He was the foreshadowing of the modern game, where almost everyone now plays from the baseline. Almost everyone plays like Borg. Everyone has good topspin ground strokes. Everybody can move well. They have good serves, and they can defend and attack well. Borg was a very complete player. And I think the game, if you were in that era and you chose the game of McEnroe, and a lot of coaches did, I don't mean to step on your toes or criticize you. I don't blame you, but because he was such a charismatic, great player. But if you chose that as the style that you were going to teach your students back in the 70s and then the 80s, and even up until like some of the 90s, a lot of coaches held on to that style. Even today, some coaches still teach that style. I could name some academies that still teach that kind of hyper-aggressive style, the way that Maxime Cressy plays right now. Very, very rare now to see guys play like that. And maybe that style will come back. But you can make a very good argument that in the 70s and 80s, if you chose that type of game style, if you chose to teach the game of McEnroe or the game of Edberg to your players, if that was a model for your teaching, you were dead wrong. You were dead wrong that was the future of the game, because what happened over the next 10, 20 years is that style has become extinct. And on the contrary, the game of Borg has flourished and become predominant on the professional tour. I'm just speaking from the men's side right now. So, it would be the equivalent of insisting on teaching the slice backhand at that time, or insisting on teaching a continental forehand, or insisting on teaching a one-handed backhand when the entire game, and on the women's side, almost the entire tour has gone to a two-handed backhand. So yeah, I think that teaching a game style of serve and volley like McEnroe is was similarly misguided at that time, but nobody knew that at that time. But Luis Bruguera knew that, and Pato Alvarez knew that, and other coaches all across Spain bought into the philosophy and the style of Borg, and they taught that en masse to the whole country, to all the aspiring players, the whole country like that. So very interesting to me when you take that sort of thought experiment back into that time and consider the choices that you had as a coach. You could teach serve and volley, you could teach baseline, you could teach Borg style or McEnroe style. Which one did you choose? Which one would you have chosen now in retrospect? Try to be honest with yourself. Guys, if you like this Project Maker Minute, please check out my big show, The Project Maker Show. It's available as a podcast on all your favorite podcasting platforms and also on this YouTube channel live. Thanks, guys. I'll see you on the next program.